or whatever it's called, and I'm putting it on Facebook. So this is very exciting. Um, I see if I can press all the right buttons and welcome everyone who is on Facebook and wherever you are. We are now live. Very exciting. I feel like I'm on television, and we have an amazing parsha. So I mean, I would tell you to sit back and enjoy it, but you can't sit back.
Oh,
This is the most exciting parsha. I feel like I said that a few weeks ago when we were
yeah,
studying
you
Parashat Shmot.
did.
This is the moment of the Exodus. This is when it happens in the middle of the night. This is it. We're told to remember it every year. You have to actually wear your belt and you wear your sandals. Don't forget, people never ate like that. You don't eat like that. You eat it like in a Bedouin tent. You don't wear your sandals in the tent and you don't wear your belt. You take off your belt. You take off your sandals. You leave them at the entrance to the tent. You come in and you sit down and you relax. You don't eat when you're standing. Remember what your mother said to you. Don't eat when you're standing. Chew your food. I remember my grandfather, Joseph Lepidus, may his memory be for a blessing. He was a guidance counselor, a tennis instructor, history teacher. I don't think he taught history. Taught a whole bunch of things at girls' Latin school here in Boston. He would tell me, chew your food 20 times and count.
Oh,
Very adamant about eating slowly. And here it says, eat your food fast while standing with your sandals on. Why? Because you want to reenact the Exodus. Now, by the way, don't do this. It's actually bad for you. So don't actually do this. But they wanted you to experience what this is like. So I want to jump in with a little bit of background, and then we're going to zoom in on a few sections, depending on how much time we'll do some of the sections. But I want to remind you of just what kind of a paradigm shift occurs in this parasha, in this portion. Okay, I thought I set up the stream in my Facebook. Hold on. So it turns out I didn't do it right. We hold on. Sorry to delay this weekly Torah portion class with Rabbi Lerner. Okay. Oops, I did the wrong thing. Okay. Oh, I have to press go live. This whole thing that I've been saying, none of it worked. Gotta love technology. Okay. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to go live. Now we're on Facebook. Oh, God. It's all so complicated. All right. Back in the olden days, you just had to teach. Now it's like you can't just teach. I don't know if, Marina, you find this. It's not just teaching. It's a whole new business. Okay. All right. In any case. So this parasha has the actual Exodus. As I said, it has the moment of departure, and they want you to reenact it by eating quickly, not taking off your sandals, and not eating appropriately. And then I want to talk about the paradigm shift and just try to get into your minds what a shift this was. I was trying to think of big shifts in human history. You know, I'm trying to think about major moments where you just suddenly saw the world different. I mean, maybe when humanity realized that the earth isn't flat. Of course, now millions of people believe that the earth is flat again. So this is the problem. I'm thinking about a moment recently where, we were taught, for you fans of physics, anyone here enjoy physics? All right, I got a few people, not so much. All right, what can you do? But if you remember, a few decades ago, you were taught about a subatomic particle called neutrinos.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone remember this?
sure.
All right, Sam remembers. Good enough. What were we taught about neutrinos, and if they had any mass? Did they have any mass? The answer was no. They had no mass, and they just went through you. By the way, I don't know if you felt it. 1 billion of them just went through your body. Did anyone feel it?
Nope.
All right. Rachel's honest. She didn't feel it. I didn't feel it. A billion of them just went through it. They're going through the solar wind. They have no mass. The only way that we could sense them was through some kind of, I don't know what they call it, like a super collider or something like that. And you can't catch them. But then I forgot when this happened. Maybe it was 20 years ago or something. Suddenly, apparently the scientists realized that that they do have mass, and they were wrong. And suddenly the whole paradigm had to shift. Maybe a better example about a paradigm shift was maybe when Einstein realized that space and time are one. Maybe that's a better paradigm shift. So what's the paradigm shift that takes place in the Parsha? Right? The paradigm shift is major. I mean, in a way, we experienced it a little bit yesterday. For those of us who felt constrained by the previous administration and its leader and what he was going to tweet and what he was going to do and what insurrections he was going to instigate and what executive orders he would do, right? We were constantly nervous and everyone was spilkes, and people like my wife who are psychotherapists got all this extra business. It was nonstop. So that was a little bit of a paradigm shift. What's the paradigm shift in the Parsha? For years and years, the Israelites have been living one way. For hundreds of years, they have been living as slaves. And suddenly, in the middle of this parasha, they're not living as slaves. They're told, go. You can leave.
I don't think they were slaves because they had herds and flocks and so on, and they were living in Goshen.
Sam, I hate to break this to you. I don't know what to say, but they were not only were they slaves, but they were told, forced by Pharaoh to throw their sons into the Nile, and they were murdered. They were victims of an attempted genocide. That's not only slaves, but that's cruel. Then Pharaoh, if you remember, takes away their brick rations. So they have to make more bricks. So they're abused slaves. Go back to Exodus, the first few chapters, and read what takes place. They are abused. They are traumatized for generations, according to the text.
400 years.
Now, yes, they did have some things. They were not maybe the same kind of slaves as African Americans were here in America. You're right, there are some differences. But never in American history do I remember a presidential decree, and clearly we've had some crazy presidential decrees, but never do I remember a presidential decree which said you should take all of your male sons and throw them into the Mississippi River as infants to die. Right? Remember when that happened? Rachel.
Yeah, but the difference here, I mean, you've got me thinking about this paradigm shift. The difference here is that for the first time, they are taking charge of their lives.
That's right.
They're told
That's right.
to do by Moses, but they're taking charge of it as opposed to always being victimized by the Pharaoh.
That's it. That's exactly what happens. So after hundreds of years, according to the text, they are about to become free people, having lived for so long without the sense, right, that God has heard their cries and suffering. They are about to see in what the text presents to us that God is dedicated to their cause, right? Having endured these 9 plagues against the Egyptians, which none of them convinced Pharaoh to let them go, they are about to witness a final plague, a very terrible plague, which in all of its awfulness will finally secure their freedom. And all of this will lead to a big change. Now, we often think about this change, at least I've often thought about it, in very minor way. They're slaves, they're free. Okay, great. But I want us to think about it as not such a natural, easy change to make, right? We all recall it at our Seder tables each year. We all, think about it as, maybe as something easy. It's in our liturgy all the time, every morning, every evening, every Friday night in Kiddush. It's a constant fixture in our history. But it actually required a major paradigm shift. And I would argue, and I want to argue this and throw it out to you, and then I want to look at some passages with you, that actually the people weren't able to fully embrace this new identity.
Right.
And because it happened so rapidly, and because maybe they were unprepared for it, and because they were traumatized both by their PTSD of being slaves and the abrupt nature of their transition, they weren't fully able to embrace their freedom. As they say many times afterwards, we'd rather go back and be slaves.
Mhm.
Right? This is a unbelievable reworking of their worldview. Instead of Pharaoh as the ultimate ruler, where they have backbreaking forced labor as the norm, a worldview now is that God is the ultimate rescuer, and freedom is a reality. And the change in the worldview can't take place overnight, which it does. Right? We're about to read. It happens in the middle of the night. V'yehi b'chatzot halayla. And it happened in the middle of the night or at midnight. And we'll see that. Right? Now, there is something interesting here that I want to look at. And this is where it gets really interesting. Let's open up to the beginning of chapter 12. Okay? Let's go to the beginning of chapter 12. Just make sure you've got the whole parsha in your head. It starts on page 374 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash,
Yeah, I know.
chapter 10. Okay?
You want your
Okay, we've got the 8th plague of locusts. I'm going to skip over locusts. I never really liked them anyway. So I'm just going to skip over
David,
that.
can you say the name of the parasha? I don't have the book, so I can search it.
Parashat Bo.
Bo?
Parashat.
Ah,
If you want, you can also get it on Sefaria, or some people pronounce it Sefaria, Sefaria, and then just type in weekly Torah portion is Parashat Bo. But Sefaria.org. Here, Barbara has it on her smartphone. Look at this. We're very,
It's
very
my
hyped.
mini iPad.
Oh, that's a mini iPad. Okay, it looked like a jumbo iPhone. I don't even know the difference. A mini iPad and a jumbo iPhone. There must be a place where those two cross. All right, so chapter 10, just to quickly catch you all up, we have the 8th plague, we have locusts. I'm going to skip over the locusts. The locusts don't work. The 9th plague, darkness, which, by the way, if you're looking for a scientific explanation of the plagues, and I was very into this in college, so I wanted to explain the whole Exodus from a natural scientific point of view. And one of the ways to do that is to find ocean cores in the Mediterranean. And there are ocean cores that they, you know what an ocean core is, right? They go down with a ship and they go down with a machine that goes to the bottom of the sea.
The
At the
drill.
bottom of the sea, it drills down and takes out part of the sediment and brings it back up. And through carbon dating and just seeing the layers of sediment, you can date the different times. So according to scientists, some scientists, about 3,500 years ago, there was an island in the Mediterranean, a volcanic island that exploded. And when it exploded, volcanic ash descended all over the Mediterranean. I was very excited by this. And I wrote a big paper in college because then it could prove some of the Exodus. Because the first thing that would happen would be darkness. So the plagues would be out of order, but at least the plagues would happen. First, there would be darkness. Now, the Israelites lived on the other side of these mountains, which is why they wouldn't be impacted by the darkness, because the wind would be blowing the ash south and they would be shaded. Then you would have all these disasters from the volcanic ash. It would kill off all kinds of wildlife and you would lead to all kinds of things. Probably the Nile becoming bloody wouldn't be the first thing. It would be towards the end. In any case, you could have some fun with that. Not my topic for today. but the 9th plague is darkness. Then you have the 11th plague, the 11th chapter. I'm now on the 11th chapter, announcement of the 10th plague. This is very serious. There are scientific explanations that try to explain how you could have the firstborn die, genetic explanations. I'm not going to get into all that.
It matters.
Over all that. Then we get to chapter 12. This is, I think, one of the most interesting and significant chapters in the Torah. So let's take a look at it. Okay. Ooh, I had a couple of things I wanted to look at. All right, I skipped over chapter 11, 1 through 3. All right, we don't have time for everything. That's okay. Let's look at chapter 12. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe vel Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, saying the following. All right, that's not so exciting. Then it gets more exciting. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. This month is for you, Rosh Chodashim. It is the beginning of all the months.
Right.
Hu lachem lechodshei hashana. It is for you of all the months of the year. Now, there's a couple of questions in this verse. And you know when I teach this class that I like to ask questions. So what's a question on this verse?
The question has to be, I always remember it as the Nisan is the beginning of the year, but most people think it's Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, so our first question is, why is this the beginning of the year? If it's Rosh Hashanah. So that's question 1. Good. What are some other questions? Look sometimes for the words themselves and see if there's any words that seem extraneous, redundant, anything at all. What do you see?
I have something, and maybe it's off, but when it says Lechadshei Hashana, it could be that, can it also be that Lechadesh Hashana or no?
So what is Chadesh? Let's first understand.
Right, to make it, to Lechadesh, to renew. So it could be that it's if a new month, or it's that we're renewing the year as opposed to be the new year, the beginning of a new year, or the same year, but maybe it's renew.
Okay, to renew the year. Now those words are connected because in the biblical mind, Chadash is new, and Chodesh, the same root, just change the vowels slightly, is a month.
Right.
Because a month is something new, right? Because they followed the lunar cycle, and when the moon disappeared, it was dark. And I want you to get in the mindset of the ancients. If you turned off the moon and you were out at night, what did you feel?
Dark.
Really dark. There's no electricity. What do you feel?
Fear.
Starlight, but that's all.
What do you feel, Rachel?
You have the starlight, but that's all you
A
have.
little starlight. What's the emotion? What's the emotion?
You're afraid.
You're afraid. I've been walking my dog recently, just at 10 o'clock. And a couple of weeks ago, I saw a pack of 3 coyotes.
Ooh.
They were the size of large German shepherds or huskies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was afraid. Now, if there's moonlight, you're a little bit less afraid. Now I'm wearing a headlamp, so I could see them. Imagine if I didn't see them. Now my fakakta dog, who's 45 pounds, thinks he can attack these dogs. He gets up on his hind legs like a bear and starts growling, and then he goes after them because he's meshugana. Those coyotes would have tore him up piece to piece, right? In their mind, the darkness of no moon was pure frightening.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually dangerous. You could be attacked by animals. You could be attacked by humans. It was dark and dangerous. So the beginning, that first sliver of light, which is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is that first splitter of, just tiniest bit of light. That was renewal for them. Mm-hmm. That's why there's a ceremony you're supposed to say in a bracha called Birkat Levana, the blessing of the moon, because it stands for renewal. And they connected it to women's menstrual cycles. because each month, right, most women in the ancient world, their menstrual cycles were connected to the lunar cycles. And so that was, again, a time where they could then be fertile and the renewal of life. And they saw all that as intertwined. That was hope. And that was possibility of new life. So Chodesh is connected to that. So we have a number of questions, right, with this. Why does it say lachem? Why is it for you? You don't need the word lachem. Hu lachem lechodshei hashana. Why is it for you is one of the questions, at least that I would ask. So let's deal with some of these questions and understand. The other question is, we're in the middle of the 10th plague. Why are we stopping to interrupt it with the calendar? Like, here we are at this dramatic moment. I'm Martin Scorsese. I'm directing the film. It's very dramatic. The Israelites are about to leave. We've gone through 9 plagues. You can imagine the tension and the buildup. And all of a sudden, we get a commercial from your day planner. What is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. Why all of a sudden do we have this interruption with the Chodshei Hashanah, with the calendar? And by the way, this is the first mitzvah. This is the first commandment given to the Israelites. And it's to observe Rosh Chodesh? Why? By the way, Rashi asks a very important question at the beginning of the Torah, and I'll digress for 1 minute here. Rashi asks, how come this isn't the beginning of the Torah? Anyone ever remember this, Rashi? Yeah, Rose remembers it. Rose, what happens here?
Rashi is asking, why do we start with the creation of the world? Why don't we start with the creation of the Jewish people? And his answer is to show that God has created everyone and therefore has the right to designate the Jewish people as his special chosen people.
Right. It's a very, in the end, Rashi comes up with a very Judaic-centric answer.
Yeah.
I prefer the beginning of his question and less of the answer, which is that he's thinking universally. We should start with the creation of the world because Jews are connected to all other people on the planet. Not that we're the best people, but in any case, I'll leave Rashi alone. And obviously he had his own motives. But there is the question, why don't you start here? Why don't you start with the birth of the Jewish people? This is the birth of the Jewish people.
Yep.
And specifically, we don't want to be born as slaves. We want to be born as free people. And this is the first mitzvah. And so the question is, why is this the first mitzvah? Why isn't the first mitzvah observe Pesach, since it's about to happen? Why is it Rosh Chodesh? Barbara.
Because this is, it connects to the first months of the year for you, that you should always remember that God had taken you out of Egypt and started your life anew.
Okay. So connecting to that, Naomi.
Isn't it also, when you talk about a paradigm shift, not that God has taken the Israelites out of Egypt only, but also that the Israelites have been taken out of Egypt to worship God, because this is their God.
Right. So there's a great teacher here in Boston who obviously passed away a number of years ago, but you probably have heard his name, Rabbi Soloveitchik,
Yeah.
who's the head of modern Orthodoxy, a great leader. And he had amazing teaching, which I've probably shared with you before in different places, right? He said, what you don't want is freedom from something. That you're just leaving something.
Yep.
That you're leaving something, you're leaving slavery behind, right? What you want is freedom towards something. And the Israelites, the whole goal of freedom is that they are looking towards something, that there is a movement towards the goal of Sinai and the mitzvot and the ethical and moral and spiritual teachings that we're going to be given. And once we're given those, then we have, in essence, a purpose. And we have a goal to our existence and to us as a people. And I would have to say, and this is where I would maybe go a little bit in Rashi's direction, that we have actually lived up a little bit to our purpose and our goal. For a tiny little people, right? We've actually had an disproportionate impact on this planet. as it continues to be to this day,
Mhm.
right? We're 14 million people. We're less than 1/5 of 1% of the world's population. And yet we have somewhere between 20 to 25% of the world's Nobel Prizes. There's clearly something, and I'm not saying, God forbid, we're genetic superior, but there's no genetic benefit. There's nothing inherently better about Jewish people than any other people. I don't want to go in that direction of Rashi. I will say something culturally, that in our culture of learning, of a quest for truth, and in a pursuit for knowledge, in a striving for understanding and for justice and in certain values, that has actually propelled us, and we have brought that into the world. As Isaiah says, you were supposed to be an Orla Goyim, a light into the nations, that we have actually done that. It's been largely because of our partners, Christianity and Muslims, who have taken over 4 billion of the people on this planet, and have done a very nice job of spreading a lot of our ideas with some tweaks. You can move Shabbat to Friday or Sunday, whatever. But nonetheless, our basic ideas have been very popular. Like, everyone likes the weekend, and everyone likes, justice and courts and systems, and the basic ideas of democracy were rooted in our ideas, and they've grown and spread. But they start in this idea of freedom towards something. And so let's take a look at that verse a little bit in detail, chapter 12. And I want to just read a couple of the insights. Right, so this month shall mark for you the beginnings of the months. Rishonu lechodshei hashana. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Now, this instruction that this month, which we know as Nisan, is to be the first month, is the first mitzvah that God gives to the Jewish people. And of course, this is the critical month. Why? Because it gives us Pesach.
Yep.
And Pesach is the birth of the Jewish people. That's
Mhm.
Pesach, which will fall 15 days later. Why does it have to fall 15 days later? Go back to the moon.
Yes, it's 15 days into the new moon. It's halfway into the new moon.
So what does it look like outside?
It's
Full moon.
full.
Full moon. So it's a beautiful time to be outside. If you're going to leave, you're less likely to trip on some rocks because you've got some light. They don't have my good headlamp, so they needed it. Okay.
So
Now the Torah says that there's a whole lead up, right? You offered the sacrifice on the 10th of the month. Okay. And then the Pesach was offered on the 14th. By the way, that's why we have all these customs leading into Pesach that already start on the day before. In the Torah, there were two separate holidays. What were the two separate holidays called? One was called Pesach. You know this.
Yeah.
That was on the 14th. Then there was a separate holiday called Chag HaMatzot,
Right.
literally the holiday of the matzos. That started on the 15th and went for 7 days until the 22nd of the month. What happened? A classical rabbinic move, a Yiddish word. You've heard this word. It's called smushing. It happens all the time. It used to happen before the pandemic in the subway cars. Smushing. It happened in the wedding ceremony. What kind of smushing happened in the wedding ceremony?
Smooching.
That's a smooching. But before the smooching,
Oh,
there's
the smooching. Yeah.
Before the smooching, there has to be smushing.
Smooching. You're right.
What was the
Engagement,
smushing in the wedding ceremony?
being engaged.
Right. There used to be two separate ceremonies. First, a glass of wine and engagement. Then you wait a separate amount of time, 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years. Why did you have to wait that amount of time? Because in that amount of time, the groom, traditionally it was the groom. This was, in a classical, heterosexual couple, where the groom was working and the bride was not, in rabbinic times, and the groom would go out and make some money, and he needed the money so he could buy or rent a place to live. So it would take him 6 months, a year, or whatever. But they ran into a problem. What was the problem? During these 6 months, something occasionally happened.
Babies.
Sometimes the groom bumped into someone else, or
Oh.
the bride, she bumped into someone else. They got into unauthorized smooching. Unauthorized smooching was a big no-no after you're engaged. That was considered adultery. And so they said, we're done with that. We're going to smush the two ceremonies together.
Okay.
That's what happened here with Pesach. It was the 14th was the Paschal sacrifice. But we couldn't any longer offer the Paschal sacrifice. After the destruction of the Second Temple, no more Paschal sacrifice. Who were the only group of quasi-Jews who offered the Paschal sacrifice after the destruction of the temple?
Ethiopian Jewry.
Samaritans?
Later, the Ethiopians. Earlier than the Ethiopians? Okay, fine, the Ethiopians. And another group I'm thinking of. This is a group that's recorded in antiquity.
What about the
Samaritans.
Samaritans?
The Samaritans, they offer the Paschal sacrifice.
Mount Gerizim.
Exactly. Very good, Sam. They're offering the Paschal sacrifice because they don't follow rabbinic law, which says don't offer the Paschal sacrifice. Another group that offers it are the Ethiopian Jews who broke off and they follow biblical Judaism. So they bring the Paschal sacrifice. Another group of Jews in Africa who converted to Judaism at the beginning of the 20th century, the Ugandan Jews. This is a great story. How many of you know this story? In the 1960s,
Yes.
everyone know this story?
Keep going.
Amazing story. The Israeli ambassador shows up because they've made relationship with Israel. And so he's told by the head of Uganda, there are Jews, not a lot, a few thousand who live in a part of Uganda. You got to go and see them. So he gets down there, he calls them up on the telephone and they say, come down for us for Pesach. He's like, great, now I've got a Seder. He shows up and what are they doing? They're slaughtering a lamb and they're roasting it. He's like, what on earth are you guys doing? They're like looking at him like you're Meshach. They're like, what are you talking about? This is right in the Torah. How can you not do this? Anyway, I digress. Okay. Back to the text. Okay. So the reason is that this is the first month, and I think we talked about this in an earlier session, is because the months start with spring. Spring is the birth of plants. Spring is renewal. Spring is the months of the year, which is why when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, it says that on the first day of the 7th month, you will sound the shofar. So that's why it's that. Then, right, why then is our first mitzvah given the commandment to mark the beginning of that month as the start of this new year? And let's go to one of the commentators. You don't have it. You could probably type it into Safari and Marina and you could get it. His name is Sforno. Anyone ever hear of Sforno?
Yeah.
Okay, Sforno is one of our great Italian commentators. I always like Italian commentators. They have great food, they have great wine, they have great paintings. Why would you not like the Italian commentators? He lived in the 15th and 16th centuries, Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, and he says the following. He explains the phrase, "Hachodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim," this month shall mark for you the beginning of months. He reframes it as the following. I'll read it in translation. From this point forward, the months will be yours, lachem, right? The chodashim will be lachem. You can do with them as you please. However, during the days of enslavement, your days were not yours, but were rather for you to do the work of others, meaning Pharaoh, at their will, or rather at his will. Therefore, this shall be the first of the month, or this shall be the first of the months of the year for you. For in this month, your autonomy, reality, your autonomous reality, your ability to be yourself really began. In Sforno's rendering, right, it's this magnificent change. The Torah is now reminding the Israelites that their lives have been irrevocably changed, that there's been this paradigm shift. Now, you could still argue it still doesn't really stick, And that's one of the arguments that the generation of the slaves is not allowed to enter the promised land because they're not fully able to embrace this new identity. But here, God is giving them this tradition of Achodesh Hazeh Lachem, right? To see that they're not under some overseeing body, that they can learn how to live in a way that is consonant with their new situation, right? Freedom is going to happen, but, right, whether or not they're ready for it, which we could probably argue that they're not. But this mitzvah sets it all in motion. And this becomes the first mitzvah, Rosh Chodesh. Because once you have Rosh Chodesh, you can set up that you actually control time. And this gets picked up by the rabbis. How does Rosh Chodesh work in rabbinic times? We have to fast forward 1,500 years. Do you know anything about how the Mishnah says you're going to do Rosh Chodesh? How did it actually work in practice when the new month started? Rose, help us out here.
You needed witnesses to show up at the temple to say they had seen a sliver of the moon. And
right, you get 3 witnesses, have to go out of the temple court. They have to look up at the sky and actually see the first glimmer of light of the moon. They bring testimony to the Beit Din, the court. The court says, okay, it's legit. You've seen the moon. It's ready. The new moon is here, whichever month of the year it is. What do they then do?
they lit fires
They light a big fire,
like in Lord of the Rings.
On fire.
just like Lord of the Rings. They stole that out of the Mishnah, and they didn't even give us like a 5% cut of the revenue on that movie. Think about how much money we would have made. They light the fire there. Then it's seen by the next mountain, north, all the way going up north out of Israel. And then that continues up into Syria, all the way on the Fertile Crescent till you get to the Jews living in Babylonia. So they would know it's now Rosh Chodesh. If you remember the scene in The Lord of the Rings, I don't know how many of you have seen that movie. It's a great trilogy, probably worth seeing it, right? That's how they called all the armies together. It was lighting the fires on the mountain, and then one fire was seen, they could light it on the next. They took that right out of the Mishnah.
And that's how we have 2-day holidays here in the diaspora.
That's how we have 2-day holidays, because it was a slow system.
Thank you.
By the time it got to Babylonia, they weren't sure if it was the same day, so the holidays got doubled, and that's how we got the idea of a 2-day holiday.
But doesn't that mean we did 2 days after the holiday ended?
So that's how we have 2 days of Yontif at the beginning and at the end. But in the 4th century of the Common Era, Larry, they fixed the calendar, but they kept the practice to say in the land of Israel, you have the holiness of the land. So it's 1-day holidays, but outside, we're not as holy. We need an extra day of the holiday to kind of help us out.
But if the fire signal got to Babylonia late, they already missed the holidays. Did they?
No, the holidays were on the 15th of the month, most of the holidays. You're right for Rosh Hashanah, but they doubled Rosh Hashanah too. Rosh Hashanah is a fascinating case because even in Israel, they observe 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, and they call it a Yom HaRichta. So anyway, I don't want to get into a long thing on Rosh Hashanah, but the days are the 15th of the month, so they had enough time to kind of say, we're not sure which day it is, but we'll double the first and the last days, which were Yontif. Those were the Yom Tovs. And that's how we get our 8-day holidays instead of our 7-day holidays as they are in the Bible. All right. So that's.
Don't you think it's time for us to catch up
What?
with our digital? I said, don't you think it's time for us to say, yes, we get the timing quickly?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Right now, I know exactly what time it is. I think all of our phones are set to the atomic clocks. So I think we even know what time it is to the second. The reason that we keep the 2nd day Yontif has nothing to do with that we're uncertain about the time, Barbara. It's simply tradition. It is absolutely nothing to do with reality of not knowing the time. You see the difference in attendance in shul. On the first day of Pesach, we can get 100, 150 people. And on the 2nd day of Pesach, we get 50 to 75. So a lot of people have asked me, why don't you cancel the 2nd day of Yontif? Because it's not as well attended. But then I say, but 75 people just came. Why would I cancel the service for the 75 people who came? So that's
And
where
they
we
still
are.
always complain about the Kiddush.
But complaining goes back to my theme of the day. The reason we complained because we never fully embraced the paradigm shift. The Israelites have been complaining since day one. All right, let's go back to the text. I've got a couple more teachings and I'm running out of time. I should be at 1:30 and I'm at 1:49 speaking about knowing the time. So in the next 11 minutes, I'm going to cram in half an hour. So fasten your seatbelts. We're going to go to a speed round. I always like the speed round. This is always my favorite part of the class. All right, here's my speed round. There's a couple of things that I really wanted to teach about Parashat Bo. Let me see how fast I can do it. There's so many great parts. I can't do them all. I have to skip some. I'm sorry. This is unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. Look at chapter 12. All right, so you see, first of all, they all get a lamb to each household. And the household could be big. So it wasn't just one lamb for like 4 people. Your household could be all of your cousins, it could be extended family. Why?
It's the way people lived in those days.
The way they lived. And it also wasn't to waste the lamb. Think about how much meat you were going to get on a lamb. All right, I digress. Lot it there, share with the neighbor who dwells, right? Share the lamb. The lamb shall be without blemish. Okay, all that's fine. I'm skipping over all that. Take some of the blood, put it on the 2 doorposts of the lintel. Now, there's a nice teaching here. Somewhere here is the verse. I'm trying to remember where it is, but there's a nice verse. Yeah, verse 6. Lachem lemishmeret. Somewhere here, there's an extra lachem. I forgot who it is. I think it's Rashi. When one of the verses takes this lachem to say you should put the blood on the inside of your doorposts. And it was for you, the blood, because it's a mitzvah for you to understand, not an outward mitzvah. And it gets into an interesting discussion about what we do for ourselves and what we project out into the world, right? When do we wear a kippah as an outward symbol of our Judaism or some kind of external manifestation of our Judaism? And when are we really projecting something of our Yiddishkeit, of our Judaism for ourselves? Anyway. Let's get to the actual what they eat.
I don't understand that. Okay, let him finish this.
All right. I'll take some questions at the end.
Yeah.
Verse 8, they shall eat it in the flesh the same night. It's roasted. Umatzot, right? And they eat it on this eish tanur bread. The original matzah was not crunchy. It was when you go to Israel and you order like your shawarma on eish tanur bread. So if you get a nice shawarma with a good chimichurri sauce, spicy, and you get it with lamb, and you get it on that flat bread, and they roll it up, and you eat it in a hurry, that's when you're observing Pesach. It's incredibly tasty, but that's Pesach. That's exactly what they did, right? Roasted over a fire, and you have to eat it all that night. Why? Because it's like you're in a rush. That's how you should eat it. Verse 11, right? Matnechem chagurim, you're wearing your belt. That's not the way they used to eat as I began the class. Used to eat sitting down. Any of you been in a Bedouin tent? Janet's been in the Bedouin tent with me. Marina's been in the Bedouin tent with me. Others have been in the Bedouin tent with yourselves or with others, right? You sit down on the sofa. It's very relaxing. Someone might be playing some music. Maybe someone's singing. You take off your shoes. This is not the way to eat. This is a different kind of eating. This is a reenactment kind of eating. You're hustling out of there. You're running out of there, right? Because on that night, I took you out. Oh, the verse that I was talking about is verse 13. Vayahadam lachem leot alabatim. You don't need the word lachem. You could just say vayahadam leot. Okay, let's keep going. And then you celebrate, verse 15, 7 days of eating unleavened bread. So you see it's 2 separate holidays, the 14th and the 15th. You see how they got shmushed. And anyone who eats chametz, you're out of the community. This is a big deal. Do not eat chametz. If you eat leavened bread, cut off from the people. That's it. You can't be in the people. That's very serious. You shall not do it. Okay? But then it goes on. After Pesach, we have this reenactment, and you would think, okay, good enough. We now know how to observe, but we have much more. And the genius, I would say, argue, of this whole tradition, this whole chapter, is in all the things that it adds on. First of all, jump ahead to verse 24. This shall be a tradition for you and your children forever. And by the way, how many of you are going to observe a Passover Seder this year? Even if it's on Zoom?
Sure.
Probably most of us. What percent of American Jews keep the Passover Seder?
Probably
All.
larger than
The
any
highest
other.
observed ritual of American Jews, over 90%. Even very assimilated American Jews keep the Passover Seder. Why? Because it's the most brilliant ritual. It's got food, it's got action, it's got reenactment, it's got creativity. Everyone makes their own flavor, and the food reenacts and re-dramatizes the action and the meaning. It's got discussion, it's got learning, it's got a little bit of the symposium, it's got everything. We should only take the Seder and make that in all of our other customs. So I've argued that we should make Yom Ha'atzmaut and make a Yom Ha'atzmaut Seder for Israel's Independence Day. We should bring in its ideas into other holidays. That's why I try to do up Purim and Shavuot and stay up all night with Shavuot. We got to make the other holidays as exciting as Pesach. Now you have this great verse 26. This is just amazing. Vaya ki yomru elechem b'nechem. And when your children say to you, I love this part. The Torah is aware of children. Very rare did you have an ancient text that even talks about children, and that the children are going to ask you a question. Children weren't allowed to speak in the ancient world. But here, yeah, your children might ask you a question. Ma avodah la'asot, what is all this stuff you're doing? Amartu, right? And just like Milo says, right? This is, I love Milo. I wish I had Bamba here today. He's not here today. And he says, this is the Pesach sacrifice. Just like we were skipped over and we could leave and we could live, our houses were skipped over. We were saved. And the people bowed low in homage, right? Vishtachavu, ve'ilchu v'yasu, and they did it. And then they left, right? And you have this intense leaving, the 10th plague. And I love how the text interweaves. This is like great filmmaking that you see nowadays, where you have like the story and you have like the reflection. Here we have the commandment and going into the future, your kid asking you something, then it goes back to the action and the actual drama of the Exodus, back and forth, back and forth. Go, get out of here. Pharaoh's like, the cry out of Egypt, the Egyptians, get out of here, take your flocks, be gone, get out of here, right? Leave, right? The Egyptians were like freaking out. Everyone should leave. The chapter goes on. After they leave, verses 37 through 42, they leave right in the middle of the night. And there's a whole thing about Kitzei Talayla. I'm going to have to skip that. I've run out of time. Then you have the whole part about eating the Pesach sacrifice. Okay? But then you have this amazing chapter, and I wanted to end with this, chapter 13. And this is where you see more of the genius of Judaism. It wasn't enough to have set up a series of time, which of course you need in order to have a calendar and to observe holidays and to have a whole system of how to live your life. It wasn't enough to have Pesach, which is our most ingenious with the Seder ritual set. It wasn't enough to have questions and answers, and your children should ask questions and you should teach them V'higadat levincha. In this chapter 13, we have 3 times V'higadat levincha. You shall teach your children. Because we're aware, what's one of our best teachings? Teach your children. In the first century of the Common Era, where people were flocking to Judaism in big numbers in the Roman Empire, and people were converting to Judaism and becoming Jews, they gave 3 things that were very popular. Anyone remember what they were? 3 answers of why they converted to Judaism. One we already mentioned.
Well, one was the Shabbat, I imagine.
One was Shabbat. Take a day off. Take a break. I love this religion. Gives me a vacation. Number 2 was kashrut. They didn't like dying of eating pig and trichinosis, which many people were dying of. And I think maybe they liked a little bit of guidance on the food. Number 3 was learning.
Learning.
They love the idea of learning, that learning should be accessible to all. Read the Torah publicly on Shabbat, on market days, on Monday and Thursday, and that anyone could learn. That's why we're living in such an amazing time. And it's curious because learning is all accessible. Go to Wikipedia and most of the information is true. But at the same time, we have people turning into Newsmax and we're learning an alternate reality of facts. So it's like we live in the most bifurcated time where you can actually have the most access right here on my waist. I have all of human knowledge is strapped to my waist in this tiny device. But at the same time, you can go into a rabbit hole and start believing that there's a pizza shop where Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton are abusing little children. I mean, it's Meshuggah, right? So we live in this crazy time. But the idea of learning is right here in chapter 13, where they repeat it 3 times, teach your children. But they did other rituals. Pidyon Ben, consecrate the firstborn as a way to remember the Exodus, right? Then skip ahead, chapter 8, explain it to your children. Then you have make it a sign, which the rabbis interpreted as tefillin, right? Make these concrete rituals that you'll feel it. You'll feel connected to the Exodus, right? And again, make it a sign on your hand. And then all of this, so you feel the Exodus. And I'll end with this note right at 2:00. If you are able to do this, we go back time and time to the Exodus. Why? 2 reasons. We go back to the Exodus so you feel the connection to the redemption of the past, not so we just relive the past. It's also so that we will live in a redeemed future. And so we as Jews have been constantly for the last 3,500 years going back and recalling the Exodus, not that we'll be mired in our past and say we're going to rest on our laurels and just look backwards, but it's actually that we're then inspired to bring about the exodus of other people. Why are Jews the ones who are active in all kinds of movements of helping other people and the redemption of other people? Why was it that Jews went down in the 1960s and were active in the civil rights movement? Why were Jews the leaders when we needed to help out in different movements to stop, the wars in Rwanda and to help the people of Darfur? Why were Jews the ones active? I would argue because of our texts, because of this chapter, which says you're going to go and remember Yetziat Mitzrayim. You're going to do what it says in the Haggadah. In every generation, remember that you were slaves. And therefore, if you really get into that mindset, then you're going to actually think about how you're going to live in the world and you're going to live differently. Some final questions or thoughts as we wrap up for today.
Will you excuse me? I have another class to get to.
Absolutely. You should go to as many classes as you can. On Zoom, it's unlimited learning. Thank you so much for coming. I hope
Thank
you got
you.
some good Torah and you feel inspired to be part of the redemption of the world as the Torah teaches, and maybe even as our country, maybe we'll start if we can just get our facts straight.
Thank you.
One can only hope. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Janet, Rose, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Wonderful day and Shabbat Shalom. We have an amazing guest speaker coming. Try to join us on Shabbat. She's wonderful. She'll do everything, midrash, poetry, Talmud, midrash, all different texts. She's like one of my favorite teachers. You're in for a treat. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.